With that being said, I'd like to call upon the first speaker from the Liberal Club.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. The question, as Josh mentioned, of today's debate is, of course, who has the better plan for this country? Simple question. I believe there's a simple answer. And that answer is, of course, that the Liberal National Coalition has the best plan for this country, period. I will be arguing that a major part of having the better plan for this country is dependent upon a fiscally responsible economic plan, driving jobs and growth in the economy and minimising intergenerational burden on future generations. Our second speaker will be speaking about the Coalition Government's sustainable, fully funded plan for infrastructure, health and education. And finally, our third speaker will be outlining the very real and dangerous risks of a shortened Labor government and the negative impact this will have on the Australian economy, and in particular their problems surrounding taxation and the inability to bring budget back into surplus. As we saw in the 2016-17 budget delivered by the government, this budget is not just another budget, but an economic plan for not only cleaning up the complete and utter mess this country's balance was left in after dysfunctional Rudd administration, but more importantly, building a more secure future for Australia in a stronger economy with more jobs. Australia is transitioning from an economy where growth was largely driven by the mining construction boom to a more diverse economy that will be fuelled by Australians having a fair go under the Coalition's plan to fuel innovation and open new markets and more investment in Australian enterprise. As evidence of the success of the Coalition's plan to date, our economy has grown at a rate of 3%. That is faster than many of the world's advanced countries, including the United Kingdom, the United States of America, Japan, and it was also well and truly above the OECD's total of just under 2%. Last year alone, our economy grew by over $40 billion. This budget keeps Australia on a sustainable plan to bring the budget back into surplus, cleaning up after the mess of previous Labor governments. This Coalition government has a plan to achieve this by not simply increasing the tax burden of hard-working, everyday Australians as a shortened Labor government would, as this would only add fuel to the fire, hindering our potential for economic success. The Coalition government instead has a plan to control spending while still funding, and in many cases increasing funding, in the vital foundations of our society, including infrastructure, health and education. The deficit will decrease from around $40 billion in 2015-16 to about $37 billion in 2016-17. And over the next 4 years, to 2019-20, the deficit is expected to fall to a mere $6 billion by comparison. The Coalition government have a deliberate and targeted plan for improving employment prospects for hard-working Australians throughout the economy. Our economic plan for jobs and growth will help young Australians get work and find meaningful employment. During the Rudd fiasco, 12% of Australian children under the age of 15 were growing up in jobless families. Quite frankly, that is unacceptable, and that's why this year the Coalition has announced a new policy called Youth Jobs Path: prepare, trial and hire to get younger, vulnerable people into jobs. From April of next year, after the Coalition government has been re-elected, young job seekers will be able to participate in pre-employment skills training and eventually be able to work for Australian businesses who will also receive support from the government when hiring such interns. Over the 4 years, the government will introduce a program creating up to 120,000 placements to help young job seekers gain invaluable experience with real Australian employers. But we're already seeing some of the good work of the Coalition government in terms of employment. Growth has been shifting to more employment-intensive service industries and has been strong in the household and business services sector. Last year in 2015, there were around 300,000 jobs created. This is the largest number of jobs created in almost a decade. Moreover, since the last election, more than 440,000 jobs have been created. In summary, as the Finance Minister aptly put, this is the right plan for Australia. set this critical direction and having laid out this plan, we must now commit to stay the course. The future of all Australians and their families will depend on it. And that is why this coalition government has the best plan for this country. Thank you.
Good government's priorities are your priorities. They should look out for the everyday Australian, creating a country that succeeds and grows through equality of opportunity. Labor wants the best for every Australian, not just a select few. And that is why we have the best plan for the entire country at this election. But before I start, I'd just like to address some points made by the Liberal Club. I always find it interesting when a party that runs on good economic management and strong fiscal responsibility forgets that the global financial crisis, i.e. the greatest economic disaster in history since the Great Depression, ever happened. So there was, just in case you don't know, there was a thing called the global financial crisis, and the reason that Australia emerged from the global financial crisis substantially better off than any other major economy in the world and maintaining our AAA credit rating was because of Labor and because of the stimulus package that Labor delivered that Malcolm Turnbull voted against. So you can see why the Liberals want us to forget all about that. I'd also like to bring up, they keep on talking about delivering a fair budget and a fair system for the Australian people. When their budget, really, it's nothing more than tax cuts for the rich and the morally abject targeting of the Australians who struggle to get by.
Shame.
That is their budget and that are their priorities. But now, on to what I want to talk about, which is healthcare, and how the Labor Party believes that affordable access to universal healthcare is a right that every Australian should have, no matter where they were born or how much money they have. The Liberal Party do not believe this. Let's face it, public funded healthcare, bulk billing, poor people getting a helping hand, let's face it, goes against everything they believe in. But, maybe it's just part of their DNA. You leave the party, you lose your soul. Just look at Malcolm Turnbull. Look at Malcolm Turnbull. Where's it gone? Where's he gone? It's like Tony Abbott's taken up residence inside his body. Can't be a comfortable experience for either of them. So, and when it comes to health, they let Peter Dutton, i.e. the man with both the morals and the personality of a potato, oversee the health of an entire country. If that does not tell you that they do not care about healthcare, I do not know what will. But, one thing you've got to admire about the Liberals, they've always hated public funded healthcare, and they always will. It's a very consistent approach. In fact, to the degree that talking with one of them, it's like entering a time warp. You get free immediate transportation back to 1950. But, let's go through the actions of their most recent glorious leaders. Howard.
Yeah.
Eyebrows jogging. Oversaw average rates of bulk billing from GPs fall from 78.5% to 35.5%. Slogans, budgies. Slashed $50 billion from public hospital funding and championed a $7 GP co-payment, disastrous for low-income families. And now we have Malcolm. Does things in suits, for suits, and by stealth. Wants to privatise Medicare. In other words, Malcolm wants to take Australia's public funded health system and put it in the hands of private companies. for supposedly greater economic efficiency. And in case the Liberals try to deny it, he has done it today. He has put a new national cancer screening register in the hands of Telstra. I don't know about you, but I've had some pretty interesting experiences with Telstra, the mobile and internet. I don't really want them in charge of a national cancer register. But something that the Liberals fail to understand is that market forces do not deliver efficiency in health.
Yeah.
Just look at the United States. They've got a healthcare system which amongst OECD nations is the most heavily exposed to market forces. And yet amongst advanced economies, the US spends the most on healthcare with the worst outcomes achieved. Do we really want to end up like them? Under coalition cutbacks, money is already a disincentive for poor people to go to the doctor. Do we want to make it impossible for them? Furthermore, our healthcare system is currently the envy of the world. Let's just run through some quick facts here. 1. The Bloomberg 2014 ranking put Australia at an incredible 6th in the world for healthcare efficiency. 2. Our own Productivity Commission's recent review of our healthcare system's efficiency didn't even mention the payment system as an area of concern, let alone say that it should be privatised. And thirdly, that OECD comparisons of developed nations consistently put Australia's healthcare system, Labor's healthcare system, ahead of the pack, both in terms of outcome and cost effectiveness. This is what Labor is protecting. This is what we are fighting for and will always fight for. And we will lift the freeze on Medicare rebates that the Libs want to keep. So what's the impact of keeping this freeze? Don't take my word for it. Listen to both the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners and the Australian Medical Association, who recently have both launched public campaigns against the extended freeze, publicly warning that it would have the direct effect of forcing doctors to charge patients a co-payment rather than bulk billing them. Sound familiar? That's because they're the Liberals. If we actually started to have some positive social reforms in this country, their voting base and their major corporate sponsors might actually lose some of their money for the benefit of everyone else. And that is why they will never change and why they will never, ever put you first.
There it is.
Labor is the country's oldest political party. We were founded as a people's movement, a trade union movement, a party which from day one have fought and always will fight for the rights of Australians who get overlooked by privileged millionaires such as Malcolm Turnbull. A Labor government will restore indexation of the Medicare benefits schedule from 2017. We will protect Medicare and we will strengthen it for the future and for the success of this nation. We will devote millions to ovarian and prostate cancer research, and we will invest $10 million to close the gap in vision loss experienced by Indigenous Australians. Our healthcare system, Labor's healthcare system, is driven by the belief that all Australians should have access to healthcare when and where they need it. By contrast, the Liberals want to gut it to the core under the neoliberalist pseudo-economic rationale that we should all live within our means. That is a legitimate phrase from the same party who has committed $50 billion of tax cuts to the rich. That's $50 billion that could be going to our schools or our hospitals, but are instead going straight back into the pockets of those who could already afford it. These are this government's priorities, and they extend to every policy issue they touch. They're the priorities of big business, of mining companies, of anyone who doesn't need a helping hand. Labor has a plan for the future, and it's a plan for everyone. It's a plan which wants the best out of every Australian, and that's why it's the best plan for Australia. Thank you.
Righty. If this election is about anything, it's about our nation's future. It's about who Australians can trust with our economy, with our money, and with our services that we rely on every single day of the week. It's a choice between a credible plan for job creation and economic growth, or alternatively, a $1 billion bill. So who has the best plan for the nation? The answer could not be clearer. Only the Coalition has a plan for an affordable, guaranteed and sustainable future for all Australians. But first, I'd just like to touch on the issue of healthcare and just highlight some of the hypocrisy of the Labor Party in this area. It's a bit rich to be preached to about health by the party of a state premier whose ideological decision to shut down the private wing of Peter Mac will cost hundreds of people their lives to cancer. Hypocrisy, utter hypocrisy. It's hypocrisy to hear pontification about health from the party that introduced the freeze on the Medicare bulk billing rebate, and now has had a change of heart and wanted to reverse their own change. Keep that in mind, because with Labor it's all about talk. It's never about action. It's never about solutions. And that will be patently clear to you by the conclusion of my speech today. Now, Labor claim to have 100 positive policies for putting people first. But Labor never actually talks about what their plan is to secure greater prosperity for Australians going into the future. In fact, Shadow Treasurer Chris Bowen has let slip recently that Australians will have to wait up to 100 days to find out what Labor's economic plan is in some newfangled mini-budget that he'll be releasing if there is the unlikely eventuality that Labor is elected. So, with that in mind, we have to really say to ourselves, Labor, they're a party with a complaint about just about everything and a solution for just about nothing. In fact, their only real proposal is just to throw money, more money, and even more money at just about every challenge facing our nation. No thought, no targeting, no honest discussion with the Australian people about the difficulties we face as a nation. Just throw more money at it, because that's worked really well for us so far. I mean, we only need to think back to disasters, national disasters, like that Great Revolution, the BER, or that other fire that Peter Garrett didn't start, the Pink Bats fiasco.
There it is.
The Pink Bats
There he
fiasco,
goes.
Josh. We only need to think back to programs like those to understand that throwing money at a problem is not enough.
In the end.
That's why Australians know that Labor's not really serious about these challenges. They see it when the Shorten Labor Party opposes $45 billion of their own savings proposals when the coalition is elected to government. $45 billion of their own proposals. And that's ABC that's saying that. They see on the other side, well, it's our ABC. They see on the other side a credible plan for balancing the budget and paying for commitments. That's the coalition's plan. And when Labor wants to front up the discussion and give the same, then maybe we'll have an election on. A key pillar of the coalition's broader economic strategy is a commitment to a vast national infrastructure plan worth $50 billion. Furthermore, the government has worked collaboratively and effectively with the states to ensure a further $23 billion worth of investment in vital infrastructure projects, such as vital roads, rail, key water infrastructure, and mobile phone black spot coverage. All important programs that will promote the Australian economy and fuel job creation. The Coalition has also continued to increase health and education spending over its term in office. This is real growth in real terms, above inflation and population growth, as confirmed again by ABC Fact Check just last week. In fact, spending in both areas is at record levels. In fact, in the first budget handed down by the Coalition, it increased 25%. So, what does that mean? It means that we are actually right now spending real money on real students and real patients, delivering real outcomes. It's not some far away, 10 years down the track, maybe promise of an unimaginably large and impossible amount of money. It's actually real money being spent today and achieving real outcomes. Because we can throw as much money as we want, but if our solutions are not targeted, if they're not focused on delivering solutions for local communities, then they're not really solutions at all. In contrast to our approach, Fact Check again has indicated that Labor's claim that its education policy is fully funded is incorrect. Again, fact check. But this should be no surprise to anybody. When we consider the Gillard government's last budget claimed that education funding would miraculously triple in a single year, after the forward estimates, of course. So Labor's claimed $47.7 billion will magically appear in an increase to tobacco. And it's claimed that $14.3 billion will magically appear when they hit superannuation. But these are looking more and more likely to be yet another version of their ill-conceived minerals resource rent tax. Supposed to raise $22.5 billion, and in the end raise less than $200 million. That's what you can depend on if you vote for a Labor government. 200 million, 22.5 billion. Labor continues to spend the money though, but it's money we just don't have, making promises that the Australian people just can't afford. Indeed, all Labor actually seems to be able to do this election is scaremonger and mislead. Already, Labor's spurious claims about cuts to health and education have been called out for what they are by independent analysts like the ABC. Similarly, Labor's false assertions about budget deficit and tax cuts for millionaires at the expense of working mothers have also been called out for what they are, completely bogus. They've been completely rejected by independent analysts. But again, it's not surprising from a party which gave us the $106 billion finance minister, $106 billion worth of errors under the tenure of that finance minister, Penny Wong, the great Penny Wong. And now we're looking at up to Penny Wong, exactly right. And now we're looking at up to $69 billion
Jesus.
of a black hole.
Or was it 32?
Up to 67 to 69 billion dollars. A rounding error, just another supermassive black hole from the Labor Party. It's all evidence to Australians that Labor can say all they want, but they can't actually pay for their promises, and they've got no intention of doing so. When Bill Shorten jokes about putting unfunded promises on the spendometer, he shows he's got no real plan, and his party cannot be trusted. The Coalition, to finalise, to sum up, the Coalition has a credible economic plan to secure Australian jobs and economic growth. In contrast, Labor have a never-ending list of spending promises that just don't mean anything. Australians know that they're ready to back a coalition government with a fully funded, affordable, sustainable plan that is practical, targeted and responsible. The Coalition is the only party who Australians can trust to provide guaranteed funding to deliver essential services like health, education and infrastructure. Australians know that if they let Labor sneak back into power, it'll be their kids and their grandkids who pay the price, and they know that they just can't foot the bill.
I'm a bit worried I won't get through my speech because there's so much horse shit I need to read. And I love that you brought up ABC Fact Check because your cuts to the ABC will see that program which you so rely on disappear. And then you brought on about this, the coalition's got an affordable and a sustainable plan. How is a $50 billion tax cut for Coles and fucking Woolies tripled the deficit in 2.5 years? How is that affordable? And then you claim to be sustainable, yet CO2 emissions have skyrocketed under your government.
True.
How are you creating a sustainable economy then? What is your answer? I'm just dumbfounded by that speech. Just empty rhetoric like this entire government that we have seen for 2.5 fucking years. 2.5 years too long. And then I think the funniest thing of his speech then was that his claim that Labor has no economic plan.
That's true.
Yet, you have stolen half of our plan on superannuation, and yet you have stolen our plan on tobacco excise. So what is it then? I just can't even. And then he's like, oh, we've got a national infrastructure plan. Then why won't you invest in the fucking Melbourne Metro? You've given more money to fucking Billy. And you have given Melbourne Metro Why won't you invest in it? Why are you scared of public transport? Is it because poor people use it?
Oh, Malcolm does too.
Oh. And then, but my favourite part was things like he's accusing Labor of scaremongering. But I want to go back to a few days ago. Peter Dutton accused refugees of at the same time taking all of our jobs, them being unable to speak English. That is scaremongering. That is the definition of it. Okay. But, in the question of who has the best plan for the country at this election, the choice is clear. While the Libs want to look after their mates in banking and big business, Labor is putting people first. This becomes abundantly clear when we examine the education policies of the two parties. Labor will fully fund Gonski and the Liberals will not.
Believe it when I say it.
Education is the most important factor in defeating poverty and providing opportunity. Gonski reforms ensure this. The Libs' heartless decision to not support Gonski is not because they don't know this, it's because they do not care about people. It is abundantly clear that the Libs believe if you are poor, you deserve to be poor, and their attitude towards education is the embodiment of this. Education is so important to our society. To see Malcolm Turnbull and the Libs provide horseshit funding and cut billions of it doesn't just make me sad, it makes me fucking angry. And that is why I'm up here speaking today. Because you can't get away with it. Gonski funding is important. It bridges a fundamental gap that exists in society. It levels the playing field. It recognises that not all children come from the same background, and it tries to mitigate this structural disadvantage that exists in our society. This is good policy, this is fair policy, and this is vital policy. To not support Gonski reforms is to fold. It's to say it's too hard to give everyone an opportunity. It's to say you don't care about people, and that's what Malcolm Turnbull has done. But I guess this isn't surprising. Malcolm Turnbull is the kind of guy that has openly supported ending funding for public schools while still supporting private schools. Malcolm Turnbull has basically turned around and said, Werribee High, you don't need textbooks, but Scotch College, they need a new fucking rowing boat, and I'll pay for it. What's most surprising about the Liberals' rejection of Gonski is not that they don't care about people, it's that it totally and wholeheartedly undermines their message that they are good economic managers. Let's consider this. The Libs have given big business a tax cut instead of providing education funding. Okay, whatever. Let's ignore how cruel that is and consider this from a purely economic angle. They have economic modelling that suggests that their $50 billion tax cut would grow the economy by 1% over 30 years in today's figures. I know what you're thinking. Whoa, that's a great investment. However, in the same period, Labor's commitment to Gonski funding would far outweigh the tax cut, and Grattan modelling proves this. It would double the GDP growth compared to the tax cuts at less of the cost, and it will continue to rise beyond the 30-year estimates far longer than that tax cut would do so. This is because education is an investment. Education changes lives and the lives of people's children. Children of more highly educated parents enjoy better outcomes in countless different aspects of life. They are less likely to rely on welfare, something you hate. They are less likely to go to jail. It is clear the benefits of better education grow over time and ripple through generations. Yet the Libs don't seem to understand this. A party that claims to understand economics rejects the greatest investment a nation can make and instead cuts the tax rates of companies that earn billions a year. I'm not talking about your local bakery. The Liberal policy would see tax cuts for companies like Coles, West Farmers, Rio Tinto and BHP. It's just fucking ridiculous.
Shame.
They don't care about people at all, and this has never been more obvious in their attitude to education. But it's not just education where the Libs have their heads in the sand. On climate change, the evidence is in and it is fucking happening. Already, we are seeing the effects of it. But you know what the Libs' response to it is? We'll plant some fucking trees. That'll solve it. Labor, on the other hand, has a real tangible policy that will lower Australian emissions and ensure our planet does not die. A 50% renewable target by 2030, which will rise to 100% by 2050, as well as an ETS that reduces pollution and encourages investment in renewable, efficient technology. Climate change is real, it is happening, just ask the drought-stricken farmers in northern Victoria. Malcolm Turnbull has sold out on climate change. This is a man who once labelled his own party's policy as bullshit, but now all of a sudden he supports it. Action on climate change needs to happen, because what is the point of jobs and growth if the earth is fucking dead? But Turnbull's selling out, it goes beyond just climate change. What about marriage equality? This is a man who has walked in pride parades. This is a man that has supported marriage equality for longer than it has been official Labor Party policy. But all of a sudden, he has changed his tune. And now he wants to hold a divisive $160 million plebiscite that half of his fucking MPs won't even respect. Why? It's because Malcolm Turnbull and the Liberals do not care about people. They care about their jobs and special interest groups that fund them, like the Australian Christian lobby. Labor policy, on the other hand, is simple. Labor will legislate for marriage equality within the first 100 days of the next parliament. Why? Because equality is not negotiable. There's a lot more to talk about, from giving Puffing Billy more money than the Melbourne Metro, to continually forcing East-West Link down on us that is a 45 cent for every dollar investment, to having tripled the deficit in 2.5 years. It's never ending and I've only scratched the surface. In education, Labor has better policy. In health, Labor has better policy. In climate change, Labor has better policy. In every policy field, Labor has better policy. And that is because Malcolm Turnbull and the Liberals are putting their mates first, while Labor is putting people's first. The choice is clear this election, everyone.
Thank you very much for today. I'd like to thank both Josh and Tom for putting on this debate. It's certainly been a very interesting debate. Today I have the great pleasure of being the third speaker for the Liberal side of politics in the debate on who has the best vision for Australia. Working Australians first face a severe threat to their well-being on July 2, and that threat is a shortened Labor government. In my speech today, I'll be discussing a number of Labor's measures that will act as a sledgehammer to the Australian economy and why a shortened government must not be elected. The Labor opposition's plan on capital gains and negative gearing, announced earlier this year, shows how little Bill Shorten understands about the Australian economy. Mr Shorten announced that a Labor government would reduce the capital gains tax discount from 50% to 25%, making Australia one of the highest taxing capital gains countries in the world. It is widely acknowledged in the economics profession that a hike in the capital gains tax will raise little revenue due to the mobility of capital in financial markets. The capital gains tax acts as a major impediment for increased entrepreneurship and capital formation. It distorts individual savings and investment choices, as noted in Labor's Henry Tax Review, and the deadweight loss placed on capital investment has been empirically shown to harm productivity and capital formation, such that it is Australian workers who will pay for Labor's policy with lower wages into the future. In the case of Labor's negative gearing policy, the Labor side of politics, except David Feeney perhaps, claim that housing prices in Australia are severely inflated because of negative gearing. What bullshit. Negative gearing has been in place for over 25 years, yet the significant growth in housing prices in our city has only been evident or manifested in the past 5 to 7 years. As the Reserve Bank notes, strong credit expansion through lower interest rates have been the cause of such higher prices, not negative gearing. Additionally, while negative gearing has mostly been set towards existing housing stock, which does place some minimal upward pressures on prices, such higher prices make construction in new housing stock more profitable for investors to invest in, such that Labor's policy would not have the effect of expanding housing supply like it says it would. Labor's policy is a disaster because it significantly hits the housing prices of existing houses. And contrary to the myths perpetuated by the other side of politics, RBA research shows that over half the investors who negatively gear a property have a taxable income of under $100,000. These are not the rich elites that you paint them out to be. As the first speaker, Daniel, who has mentioned, it has been great to see that the job creators in Australia, i.e. the businessmen and women of our country, have overwhelmingly backed the Coalition's plan. But there also have been a number of other people on the other side of politics who have backed our plan. Labor's appointed Secretary to the Treasury, Dr. Martin Parkinson, has previously stated, as for the company tax cuts, about half the benefit ends up to the workers because it helps stimulate growth and jobs in the economy. The Shadow Assistant Treasurer and Labor's most disliked economist, Dr. Andrew Lee, who has supported other great coalition policies in the past, such as fee deregulation and GP co-payments, stated not long ago, we know the company tax rate is a significant drag on growth. There's potential for us to miss out on high-quality investments if we have a too high a company tax rate. And finally, even the Shadow Treasurer himself, Mr. Chris Bowen, has backed out company tax cuts in the past. He stated in 2015, I have previously said the nation should be aiming for a 25% corporate tax rate. So if you don't believe it from me that Labor's stance on this policy is idiotic, believe you should actually listen to your own side of politics who used to support this policy up until the election date was announced. On Labor's desire to continue spending at unsustainable levels, it is clear since their 2013 federal election defeat that they have learned absolutely nothing. Shame. You can't keep spending more and taxing more of a shrinking number of people in Australia who pay net levels of tax and expect to get back to surplus. Labor have continued with the unaffordable Gonski funding model that doesn't actually drive better funding outcomes, it just continues the same old problem. Senator Kim Il-kar has proposed to expand the ill-conceived demand-driven higher education system, which hurts the budget bottom line and continues the mass subsidisation of students many of whom are never going to pay back their loan to the taxpayer. They have blindly opposed many of the sensible changes the Coalition have proposed to the pension and family tax benefits, with their philosophy based around the belief that there is a never-ending pot of gold to fund their pet projects. They have attacked the Abbott-Turnbull government for the so-called savage cuts to health and education that in reality only moderately pared back the growth rates in spending, contrary to what the last speaker lied about. On the 7th of September 2013, the Australian people elected a Liberal government to, as usual, fix Labor's mess. Since that time, the Labor Party has sat on its hands every day to block the Coalition's progress to reform the Australian economy. I ask all students to reject the chaos that will ensue under a shortened Labor government and choose a Turnbull government that will support jobs and growth in the Australian economy. Thank you for listening today.
I'm actually going to start by doing something a little unorthodox and give the young Libs some credit. Now I know that there are a bunch of stereotypes about young Libs. I know that you expect them to be smug and male and greasy and male and sharply dressed and male. But say what you will about these three, one thing I think we can all agree on. They absolutely nailed the talking points. We heard jobs and growth, we heard all about living within our means, tightening our belts, all of the classics, the greatest history. And I think it's worth pointing that out. I think it's worth saying congratulations. There were moments when I thought I could have been listening to the great Malcolm Turnbull himself. So well done to you. You'll make fine backbenchers someday. I can't wait not to vote for you. But there are a couple of these talking points that I suppose it's fair to say grinded my gears, and they're the talking points that I want to, focus on today. And the first one of those was this idea that we heard very early on that Labor is all talk. And this may be the shortest rebuttal that I have ever given. I simply ask those opposite, who was it who implemented Medicare? It was a Labor government. I don't know what you mean by all talk, but universal health care exists in this country because of the Labor government. We escaped the GFC relatively unscathed because of the Labor government. All of the great economic reforms in our history have come at the hands of Labor governments. Yeah. So I'm not sure what you mean by all talk. I think the record of history speaks for itself. The more important thing that I want to talk about tonight is the line you always hear from Libs, and you heard it today, and that is that the Liberals are better at managing the economy than Labor. It's one of these things, you hear them say it all the time. It usually goes something like this, the Liberals believe in fiscal restraint. We know how to keep the house in order. We're much better at managing the economy because, we know how to tighten belts, and we believe in small government. We believe the government is wasteful, they should back out of the way and let the markets do the thing. You can hear them hearing, you can tell that I'm not parodying their position. You do hear this all the time. And I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to believe them. Because it's one of those things, when you hear, as we've heard from Andrew, all the sort of economic jargon that they talk in, it's quite easy to be tempted to believe them and to think that, the Liberals, when it comes to the economy, they know what they're talking about. Only one problem, and that's that it is total bullshit. This claim that the Liberals somehow have all of the answers when it comes to the economy is one of the great fictions in the history of Australia. To find out why, all we need to do is consult the history books. And once again, I'm sure that even those opposite would agree that the great modernising reforms that made our economy ready to face the 21st century, the reforms that allowed us to be the prosperous and rich nation that we are now, those reforms were undertaken by the Hawke and Keating Labor governments. It was the Hawke and Keating Labor governments that prepared this economy for the 21st century, and the prosperity that we enjoy now started then. In contrast, John Howard cash splashed his way through a cruisy mining boom. And then when the next great hardship came along, again it was the stimulus package under the Rudd government that saw us go through unscathed while the rest of the world plunged into significant recession. And again, you can't argue with the record. Australia did not enter a recession in 2008 and 2009. The US did, Europe did, the rest of the world did, we did not. Once again, that's because Labor does know how to manage the economy. And yes, a budget deficit fell out of that, as the Liberals are so fond of reminding us. And the Liberals do love talking about the budget deficit and about how they were elected to fix up Labor's mess. Let's have a look at how that's gone. Since Tony Abbott came to office in 2013, the Libs have had 3 years to fix this budget emergency that they like to keep talking about. In that time, the budget surplus has increased. Government spending as a percentage of GDP has not moved. They can talk all they like about tightening belts. They can talk all they like about fiscal restraint, but their record proves otherwise. But it's not really the history that bothers me most about this. What bothers me most about this claim that Liberals are great for the economy is how it gels with economics itself. Because it really frustrates me that the way Liberals express this is usually, economics tells us that. I think we heard Andrew say, it's common knowledge in the economics profession that. And they'll tend to say, economics tells us that small government is good, that governments are wasteful, that we need to let the markets do their thing, etc., etc., etc. Economics tells us that austerity is necessary. The only problem is that economics doesn't tell us this at all. Sure, a handful of right-wing economists do things like that. people like Milton Friedman, whose books these guys have read the blurbs of. But congratulations. But there is. I certainly didn't. There is an emerging, there is a consensus amongst the majority of economists that markets can and do fail, and the governments can and should do something about it. So I guess the most important thing that I want to convey to everyone in this room tonight is when you hear the Liberals say, economics tells us this, it's total nonsense. Economics doesn't tell us any of the answers. If economics had the magical formula for economic prosperity worked out, we wouldn't need to be here. We could all agree, we could all go home. Well, there'd still be climate change denialists and hypotheticals and all the rest, but on this at least we would find some agreement. But of course, these questions of economic policy are not settled. The recipe for prosperity and the recipe for success is not settled. That's why we're here, that's why we're having this debate. When it comes to big questions of policy, economics can clarify the problems that we face. And on those problems like the budget deficit, problems like the ageing population, we can all agree. But the solutions and the policy paths that we choose to take to come up with solutions to these problems, those questions are up to us to answer. Economics doesn't tell us what to do. We have to make a judgment call, and that judgment call is based on our values. So when you hear them talking about small government, it might sound like it's economics. It's not, it's ideology. At the heart of all of these policy decisions, all of the policy decisions you will see in the lead up to this election, is ideology. Right? The decisions that parties choose to make reflect their values. I am more than happy to agree, and both sides of politics are happy to agree, for instance, the budget deficit needs fixing. But there are any number of things you could do to fix the budget deficit. And the choices that you make reflect what you care about. So let's have a look at what the Liberals care about. In 2014, the Libs had their first attempt to fix the budget emergency that they had been talking about for so long. And what did they do first? They took people off the pension. They took people off the dole. They made university cost more, they made going to the doctors cost more, and they removed real spending growth in health and education. Now, we heard that the current budgets didn't do that, but the forward years do. An $80 billion cut taken out of schools and hospitals. That's where they went first. And sure, that is one way to get the budget back to surplus, but it sure as hell isn't the only way. But what this does show is exactly what we should already know, and that's that the Liberals' ideology is always the first people who should pay are the people who can least afford it. And they will justify this by talking about lifters and leaners and talking about tightening belts, right? We heard this from Joe Hockey, that there are people are on the dole, people are on pensions, university students, they're leaners, they're mooching off the system, and in these tough times, they're the ones who have to pay first. But if we want to talk about lifters and leaners, let's take a look at the top. Now you tell me how a CEO who is earning $500,000 but pays virtually no tax because they've written off their 5 or 6 investment properties against their income, you tell me how that person is not a leaner. You take a look at a company that earns millions and millions and millions of dollars in profit on our shores and pays not a cent of tax, and you tell me how that company is not a leaner.
Yeah.
If we want to talk about tightening belts, Labor and Labor's values say that the first people who should tighten their belts are the leaders up the top. And the first place we should start when we embark on the process of budget reform is by targeting those who can afford it. And it's not because of any animosity towards them. The reason that we target those at the top who can afford it is simply because the pain is felt so severely when we go to the other end. And we can see what happens when these Liberal cuts hit people at the bottom. We can see what happens when unemployment skyrockets, for instance in a recession, which we avoided thanks to the Labor government stimulus. We can see that this stuff at the bottom, it really matters. And Duncan Storer, who appeared on Q&A and who made such a furor because the right-wing media, you can hear them shaming now. They spent the entire week. As soon as this poor bugger dared to say on Q&A on national television his life was difficult, they spent the entire week trying to dig dirt on him. All he was saying is that the few extra dollars to me make a material difference. That the difference between me being broke on the weekend and me not being broke on the weekend. And he was dead right. People up the top don't feel that as much. And that's not just conjecture. Study after study after study shows that incentives to work, save and invest do not change substantially at all when tax concessions are entered or taken away. In other words, to use the economic jargon, the elasticity of labour supply for people up the top is virtually insignificant. That's something that we know. And again, that's a matter of values. And you might say, well, the government's changed since 2014, but when we look at the 2016 budget, we can see that it hasn't. The cuts to health and education are still there. There is still no new infrastructure funding. There is still no credible path to surplus. In 3 years, we've seen nothing. In fact, as Treasury informed us in their pre-election outlook, the path to surplus that we were supposed to hear about in the budget is not there. It's based on a bunch of optimistic assumptions that are most likely to end up wrong. The Liberals have done nothing to put our budget on the right path, but all they've done is reveal themselves for the ideological, closed-minded people that they are. And they will dress this up in the language of economics and make us think that we have no other choice but to accept what they're saying, but we do. We don't have to accept that in a time of crisis like this we need to fork out $50 billion to pay for a tax cut for the highest businesses. We simply don't have to expect that. They will force us into a corner and they'll say, oh, you know, Labor's policies are all out waste, there's no economic justification, we're going to have to take a tough dose of medicine. But it is all rhetoric. There is absolutely no substance behind that point. And this, I suppose, is the choice that faces us at the election. We have to ask ourselves, what is the Australia that we want to see? Do we want the Australia that comes in the future to be one where everybody has the chance to share in prosperity? Where prosperity means income equality, greater income equality, where prosperity means the people who are born with less have the chance to climb up the ladder and succeed? Or do we want the Australia that we live in to become one where your bank account or your parents' bank account determines where you end up? Because make no mistake, that's the Australia that we'll be heading to under a Liberal government. And I tell you what, maybe that is the Australia you want. And if it is, if you know, the bank account driven world is the world that you want to live in, fine, vote for the Liberals, you belong together. But if that's not, don't believe them when they tell you that you have no other choice. You do have the choice to put people first. Fairness and prosperity are not at odds. Fairness and prosperity go together. And if you vote for Labor, you'll see a future that has both.
Here, here.